I stare out the window at the setting sun, coloring the Galveston sky shades of scarlet and purple. Sunsets have always been special here in the suburbs, the sprawling oaks framing the horizon like a picture frame. I used to love sitting on the veranda of my house with Elizabeth, sipping lemonade and watching the day slip away from the horizon. Now I stand at someone else's window, in someone else's house, and those beautiful sunsets seem only a bitter reminder of the past. I am 73 years old, and I, Carlton Hicks, former professor of history at Galveston College, have become a shadow of myself. It's been 2 years since Elizabeth's passing. Cancer took her quickly and ruthlessly, leaving me alone in the house we shared for 38 years. The rooms filled with memories and her laughter suddenly became empty and humming. I started talking to ghosts, to her pictures, to her favorite chair, to the books she read. "Daddy, you can't live alone," Prudence, my only daughter, said when she arrived on the 40th day after the funeral. "You've neglected yourself. The house is a mess. You forget to take your medication." I wanted to object, to say I was coping, that I just needed time, but her determined tone and concerned look made me doubt myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe 71 is really too much to handle alone. "We have a big house," she continued while I remained silent. "Bertram recently got a promotion at the bank. We can get you a room on the first floor so you don't have to climb the stairs. You'll see your grandchildren every day." Bertram, my son-in-law, stood behind her back and nodded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I had always sensed a cold, calculating nature in him, but at that moment I wanted to believe I was wrong. The sale of the house went faster than I expected. The realtor quoted a price that seemed low to me, but Prudence insisted it was realistic market value. The money went into an account I had access to, but Prudence suggested that she help me with the finances, so I wouldn't worry. I realize now that this was the first step to losing my independence. The move was painful. Every book, every picture, every item had a story connected to Elizabeth. I wanted to keep everything, but the big truck took most of our life away to the thrift store or the dump. "Dad, there's just no room in our house for all this stuff," Prudence would say, throwing out boxes of letters Elizabeth and I wrote to each other when I was at conferences. My room in Prudence and Bertram's house turned out to be a converted study, small, with a window overlooking the neighbor's garage. It fit only a bed, a small dresser, and a chair. The books I had managed to save were in boxes in the garage because they collect dust and Hamish is allergic. Hamish is my grandson, an 8-year-old boy with a quiet voice and an inquisitive mind. His sister, Aurora, 3 years younger, is a perky girl with curly hair that reminds me of a young Elizabeth. For the first few weeks, I tried to be helpful and inconspicuous. I made breakfast when everyone was still asleep, cleared the table after dinner, tried not to occupy the bathroom during the morning rush hours. The children seemed glad to have me around, and especially Hamish, who could listen to my stories of ancient civilizations and great battles for hours. "Grandpa, tell me more about Alexander the Great," he asked, climbing into my lap. I would start the story, but often we were interrupted by Prudence's sharp voice. "Hamish, it's time for you to do your homework. Daddy, don't distract the child with your stories." Stories. That's what my lectures that once filled the classrooms of students have become. I taught history for 40 years, wrote 3 books, participated in archaeological expeditions, and now I was telling tales. Gradually, my list of duties grew. First, it was to pick up the kids from school, because Bertram has an important meeting. Then it was to make dinner, because Prudence was working late. Then laundry, mow the lawn, wash the car. "Daddy, you have to do something," Prudence said with a hint of irritation. "You said yourself you didn't want to feel useless." I did say that, but I didn't mean turning into a housekeeper. I tried to talk to Bertram once when he came home from work. He was a manager at one of Galveston's largest banks, always in a perfectly ironed shirt and with neatly combed reddish hair, in which early gray was already peeking through. "Bertram, I've been thinking about resuming teaching," I said as he sank tiredly into his leather chair in the living room. "Maybe a few hours a week at the community college." He looked at me with ill-concealed surprise. "Carlton, you're 73. Who's going to take you?" He took a sip of the whiskey I'd poured for him. "Besides, who's going to pick up the kids from school? You know how busy Prudence is at her real estate agency. Maybe they could ride the school bus like the other kids?" And spend an extra hour on the road? He wrinkled his nose. No, that's inefficient. Look, Carlton, we took you into our family, put a roof over your head. Isn't it only fair that you help us in return? I wanted to say that I'd given all my savings from the sale of Prudence's house, that I hadn't asked to live with them, that I'd earned the right to my own life. But instead I remained silent, nodded, and retired to my room, feeling infinitely old and infinitely alone. It became especially hard when I realized that I had become invisible in my daughter's house. When guests came over, they would introduce me with a curt, "And this is my father," and immediately turn the conversation to another topic. At family dinners, my opinion was not asked. My stories were interrupted. I stopped being Carlton Hicks, the history professor, and became just Prudence's dad, an old man who sometimes confused names and repeated the same stories. One evening, when the kids were already asleep and Bertram was working late, I heard Prudence talking on the phone to a friend. "No, we can't go on vacation," she said irritably. "We have Daddy on our hands now. You can't leave him alone, and a nursing home costs a fortune." A nursing home. Those words hit me like physical force. Is this really what's ahead of me? To be in the arms of my daughter until she finds a way to get rid of me? That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. Outside the window the rain rumbled, pounding on the roof and windowsill, just as it had once done in Elizabeth's and my house. I thought about her, about what she would say if she saw me now. Elizabeth had always been a strong woman, with a sharp mind and a sense of self-worth. She would never let anyone, not even our daughter, treat her like a burden. "I made a mistake, Liz," I whispered into the darkness. "I shouldn't have sold our house. I shouldn't have let them take our lives." I woke up in the morning with a sore back, an old injury from when I'd been a young man digging in Greece, and the damp weather was making itself felt. But despite the pain, I got up at 6 in the morning, as usual, to make breakfast for everyone. Prudence came down to the kitchen as I was setting the table. She was dressed in a business suit. She had an important meeting with clients today. "Daddy," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee, "Bertram and I have decided that next month we're going to give him a birthday party. There will be many guests, colleagues from the bank, partners. We'll need your help with the arrangements." I nodded, stirring oatmeal for Hamish and Aurora, who were due to wake up soon. "Of course, Prudence. What can I do to help?" "Everything," she said. "Cleaning, cooking, serving. Bertram wants everything to be perfect." I nodded again, feeling the weight building inside me. Not even a "please, Daddy," or a "we'd appreciate it." Just an order, as if I wasn't a father, but a hired hand. When Prudence left, I sat down at the table and looked at my hands. The hands that had once held ancient artifacts, written books, caressed Elizabeth's hair. Now they were covered in pigment stains and a slight tremor, but they were still my hands, the hands of a man who had lived a long, meaningful life. In that moment, I realized that moving in with my daughter had been a mistake. I had lost not only my home, but my dignity, my autonomy. I had become what they wanted me to be, a helpless old man to be used and forgotten. But somewhere deep inside me still lived the Carlton Hicks who had spent months in the sands of Egypt, who had argued with colleagues at conferences, who had loved a woman with all his heart and been loved in return. And that Carlton Hicks was not ready to give up. 2 weeks before Bertram's birthday, the house turned into an anthill. Prudence made a detailed task list, printed it out on the printer, and attached it to the refrigerator with a magnet. My name was next to most of the items: cleaning all the rooms, washing the windows, polishing the silverware that used to gather dust in the cupboard, buying groceries, preparing snacks. "Papa, do you realize how important this is to us?" Prudence asked, looking at me over her reading glasses. "There will be influential people from the bank, Bertram's partners, people on whom his career depends." I nodded silently. Over the past year, I'd gotten used to the fact that no one was interested in my opinion. My role had been reduced to simply following instructions. "Everything has to be perfect," she continued, tapping her pen on the table. "Sonner, Bertram was turning 45, a significant date. Plus, he's been hinted at a possible promotion to regional director." "I'll do it," I replied quietly, feeling the pain in my back increase at the thought of the work ahead of me. Prudence nodded, as if she expected no other answer, and returned to her clipboard, where she was compiling the guest list. The next morning, I started on the living room. I wiped every surface, dusted the corners, polished the woodwork. The movements were difficult. The arthritis in my fingers made every action a challenge. But I didn't complain. Over the past few months, I'd learned to hide the pain, so I wouldn't hear Prudence say, "Dad, you're being overdramatic. At your age, everyone hurts." By mid-afternoon, I was done with the living room and dining room and moved on to the kitchen. This was Elizabeth's favorite space. She loved to cook, experimenting with recipes from different countries. When we traveled, she always visited the local markets, talking to the vendors, asking out cooking secrets. Now this kitchen was sterile and practical. No unnecessary condiments or tools. Prudence preferred to order food or heat up convenience foods. When the kids came home from school, they found me on my knees cleaning out the space under the sink. "Grandpa, why are you doing the cleaning?" Aurora asked, tilting her head. "Can't Mom hire a cleaning lady?" "She can," I answered, struggling to get up and feeling my knees crunch. "But I don't mind helping. It's for your dad." "But you're hurting," Hamish said, looking at me with his serious eyes. "Kids always notice more than adults realize." "A little," I admitted, patting him on the head. "But you know what? I'm going to sleep like a baby after this cleanup." Hamish smiled uncertainly, but there was doubt in his eyes. In the evening, when I finished with the kitchen and started making a grocery list, Bertram returned. He entered the house with the look of a man carrying the weight of the world's problems on his shoulders. His expensive suit was impeccable, but his face looked tense. "Good evening, Bertram," I said, not looking up from the list. He nodded, more to the space than to me, and headed for the bar in the corner of the living room. He poured himself a whiskey, took a sip, and then spoke. "Carlton, Prudence tells me you're working on my birthday party." "Yes," I confirmed. "I finished the living room and kitchen today. Tomorrow I'll do the dining room and the terrace." Bertram nodded, as if inspecting the work of a subordinate. "Good. This is an important event. The chairman of the board of our bank is coming. Some big clients." He spoke as if he were explaining to a child why it was wrong to make noise during an important adult conversation. Condescending, with a touch of impatience. "I understand," I replied. Prudence explained. "Good." He took another sip. "And Carlton, try to be, inconspicuous this evening." "Inconspicuous. No stories about ancient history or your excavations. This is a business event, not a college lecture." I felt a wave of indignation rising inside, but I suppressed it. In recent years, I've learned to swallow insults and humiliation like bitter pills. "And of course, Bertram, I'll just help with serving the guests." He nodded, finished his whiskey, and left the room without thanking me. I could hear him coming up the stairs saying hello to the children, his voice immediately becoming softer and warmer as he spoke to them. The next few days turned into a marathon of shopping and preparation. I rode around the stores on an old bicycle I found in the garage and repaired. I didn't have a car. Prudence had insisted on selling my old Honda after the move, explaining that it's dangerous to drive at your age. The bike was heavy and creaky, but it gave me a sense of freedom that I sorely lacked in my daughter's house. At the supermarket, I methodically picked everything on the list. Fresh vegetables for appetizers, meat for main dishes, ingredients for sauces and marinades. At home, I prepared what could be made ahead of time and frozen. My hands remembered the motions. Elizabeth had taught me to cook when we were still students and living on a scholarship. The day before the party, I worked on decorating the house. Prudence had ordered flowers, but they needed to be arranged in vases and distributed to the rooms. I worked slowly, thinking carefully about the arrangements, remembering how Elizabeth loved lilies and always had them on the table in our dining room. In the evening, as I finished the flowers and began to rub the silverware, Prudence and Bertram returned to the house. They were excited and talking louder than usual. I heard them pass into the kitchen without noticing me in the dining room, which was separated from the kitchen only by an arched doorway. "Are you sure he'll be all right tomorrow?" Bertram's voice sounded concerned. "The last thing I need is your father knocking over a tray of canapes on the chairman of the board." "Don't worry," Prudence replied with slight irritation. "He's still capable of holding the tray. Besides, it won't be for long." "What do you mean?" I froze, clutching the silver fork I was polishing. "I found a great nursing home in Kirby," Prudence continued, her voice low, but I could still hear every word. "It's not cheap, but we have the money from the sale of Dad's house. There's round-the-clock care nurses, even a hydrotherapy pool, Perfect for his back. And when do you plan to let him know? Bertram asked. After your birthday. I don't want to ruin the celebration. You know how dramatic he can get. I felt my legs give out. I sank slowly into the chair, trying not to make a sound. Would he go for it? Bertram's voice sounded doubtful. He has no choice, Prudence answered with cold certainty. The money from the sale of the house is in my account. His pension won't even pay for a rented room. Besides, at his age, it's dangerous to live alone. You're right, agreed Bertram, and it will be easier for us. No more obligations, no more being in the house forever. We'll be able to go on vacation finally. Exactly, Prudence sounded relieved. And it's better for the children to spend time at summer camps than to listen to senile stories. They continued talking, but I wasn't listening. My ears were buzzing and my throat felt nauseous. A nursing home. They were planning to send me to a nursing home, like a broken thing that they didn't want to keep in the house anymore. And to use my own money for it, the money from the sale of the house Elizabeth and I had bought, paying off the mortgage for 30 years, saving for everything. I got up quietly and left the dining room through the other door leading to the hallway. I needed to be alone, to think about what I had heard. In my small room, I sat on my bed and stared into the space in front of me. What would Elizabeth say? She had always been much more decisive than me, not afraid of confrontation. Carlton, she would say, you are not going to let our daughter treat you like garbage. But what could I do? Prudence was right. My pension wouldn't be enough to live on my own, especially with housing prices in Galveston. And the money from the sale of the house was indeed in her account. I signed the papers myself, trusting my daughter. There was a quiet knock on the door. I flinched and tried to put a calm expression on my face. Come in. The door opened and Hamish's head appeared in the doorway. Grandpa, may I come in? Of course, my boy. He slipped into the room and sat down beside me on the bed. What are you reading? He asked, pointing to a book lying on the bedside table. It's Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I'm rereading it. Your grandmother loved that book. Hamish nodded thoughtfully. Grandpa, are you sad? The question caught me off guard. I looked into his serious eyes and realized I couldn't lie. A little, I admitted. Sometimes I miss my grandmother a lot, and my old house. You don't like living with us? He sounded disappointed. No, not at all. I hurried to reassure him. I'm very happy to see you and Aurora every day. It's just, when you get old, it's sometimes hard to adjust to a new place. Hamish nodded with the look of a man who understands a lot more than one would expect at his age. Mom says you'll be leaving soon, he said quietly. I caught my breath. What exactly did she say? That you'll go to a special place for old people where you'll be taken care of. She said it's because we're too busy to take care of you. I felt anger rising in my chest. They had already discussed this with the kids, but not with me. Hamish, I took his small palm in my aging hands. No matter what happens, I'll always be your grandfather. And I'll always find a way to see you and Aurora. He pressed himself against me, wrapping his arms around my neck. I don't want you to leave, he whispered. I know, baby, I know. After Hamish left, I sat still for a long time. My mind was spinning with thoughts, plans, ideas, but most importantly, I felt something inside me that had been bent for too long, slowly straightening. My pride, my dignity. On Bertram's birthday, I woke up early, before dawn. There was a lot of work to be done. Preparing snacks, setting out dishes, organizing the bar. But before I did, I pulled out from under the mattress an old photograph I'd always kept with me. Elizabeth on our wedding day, laughing, flowers in her hair. Give me strength, Liz, I whispered. I'm going to need your courage today. I kissed the picture and tucked it into the breast pocket of my shirt. Then I straightened up, took a deep breath, and left the room, ready for the day ahead, the day that I now realized was going to be the turning point in my life. The morning of Bertram's birthday was clear and sunny, as if the weather itself had decided to favor my son-in-law. I got up at dawn and went straight to work. At my age, movement is not as fast as it used to be, and I knew I would need all the energy I could muster to get through the day. By 10 o'clock, I was done with the main courses, baked salmon, roast beef, and mixed vegetables. That left only the appetizers, which couldn't be prepared too soon. My fingers, curled by arthritis, moved leisurely but precisely, cutting, mixing, decorating. Prudence returned at noon with an armful of packages, the last of the holiday shopping. She looked around the kitchen with a critical eye. "Is everything ready?" she asked in a tone that implied that the answer should only be yes. "Almost," I answered. "We just need to put out the canapes and prepare the cocktail sauces." Prudence pressed her lips together. "Can you make it by 5? The guests would start arriving at 6, and I still had to get to the salon." "I can make it," I said. "Suffer, don't worry." "And Dad," she looked at my plaid shirt and jeans. "You remember to change, right? I put you black pants and a white shirt. You're going to be helping with the catering. You need to look, appropriate." I nodded, not looking up from the cutting board where I was slicing cucumbers for canapes. The maid's uniform was what those black pants and white shirt had become for me. I had once worn tweed jackets with leather elbow patches and lectured to students, but now I had to serve drinks to people, many of whom were old enough to be my children. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. I changed my clothes as Prudence had asked and began to arrange the glasses and plates. Bertram appeared in the living room, dressed in a new dark blue suit and silk tie. He looked tense but pleased. "Schick to one to. Well done, Carlton," he said, glancing around at the set tables. "It looks impressive." It was probably the first compliment I'd heard from him in 2 years. "Thank you," I replied. "I did my best." "Remember our conversation?" he continued, lowering his voice even though there was no one else in the room. "No stories, just be inconspicuous." I felt something inside me clench, but I nodded. The picture of Elizabeth, hidden in the breast pocket of my shirt, seemed to give me strength. At 6 sharp, the first guest showed up, an elderly couple I didn't know. Bertram greeted them with a wide smile that was never meant for me. Prudence, radiant in her new burgundy-colored dress, immediately took them under her arms, leading them to the bar. Gradually, the house filled with people, bankers with their wives, Bertram's partners, a few neighbors. They all greeted each other, exchanging handshakes and air kisses, laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny, and I slid between them with a tray of drinks and hors d'oeuvres, almost invisible. "A glass of champagne," I suggested. "Maybe a canapé with salmon?" Most of the guests took their glasses without even looking at me, continuing their conversations. A few mumbled, "Thank you," or nodded. Only one man, gray-haired and with good wrinkles around his eyes, a professor from the local college, I think, looked at me carefully. "Aren't you Carlton Hicks?" he asked, squinting his eyes. "The author of Shadows of Empires, a reassessment of the Hellenistic period?" I froze, surprised that someone recognized me. "Yes, that's me." "Unbelievable." He held out his hand. "I'm Edward Simmons. I teach history at Galveston College. Your book was revolutionary. We still include it in our graduate program." I felt the color rise to my cheeks. It had been a long time since I'd heard words like that. "It's a pleasure," I said, shaking his hand. "What are you doing at this party?" he asked. "Do you know Bertram?" Before I could answer, Prudence materialized beside me. Her face was tense, and her eyes were lightning fast. "Ephraim." "Daddy," she said, emphasizing the word as if it were obscene. "The guests at the end of the hall need drinks." "Is that your father?" Professor Simmons asked in surprise. "But why is he—" "Excuse me," Prudence interrupted him with a strained smile. "We have guests to serve. Daddy, please." She practically pushed me away, whispering, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be working, not talking." I obediently headed to the bar for another round of drinks. Through the crowd, I could see Prudence explaining something to the professor frowning and shaking his head. Then she led him away to the other guests, and I continued my work. The evening rolled on. Dinner was served, I helped set the plates and put away the used dishes. Then there were toasts. The guests raised their glasses to Bertram's health and success, and he smiled and thanked me modestly. I could feel the fatigue building up in my body. My back ached more and more, and my legs felt like lead. But I kept working, moving between the kitchen and the living room, picking up empty plates, filling glasses. Around 9 p.m., when the main courses had been eaten and the guests had moved on to desserts and coffee, I noticed Bertram and Prudence talking intensely about something in the corner of the room. Their faces looked concerned, and they occasionally cast glances in my direction. I continued to work, pretending not to notice. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. I rushed in and found Aurora standing over the shards of a large glass dish. "Grandpa," she whispered fearfully, "I wanted to help." "It's okay, sweetheart," I reassured her, gently pulling her away from the shards. "Stay here. I'll clean it up." I knelt down and started picking up large pieces of glass. My hands were shaking with fatigue, and one of the shards cut my finger deeply. I groaned softly as I saw the blood dripping onto the floor. "Ashana, what's going on here?" Prudence stood in the kitchen doorway, her face contorted with anger when she saw the broken dish and the blood. "Aurora accidentally broke the dish," I explained, holding my cut finger with a napkin. "It's no big deal. I'm already cleaning it up." "No big deal," Prudence hissed. "This dish is from the set Bertram's mother gave us. It cost a fortune." "I didn't do it on purpose," Aurora whispered, her lower lip trembling. "Go to your room," Prudence ordered her. "Now!" Aurora ran out of the kitchen, sobbing. I rose slowly, feeling my knees protest. "Don't talk to her like that," I said quietly but firmly. "She's just a child." Prudence turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "And you don't tell me how to talk to my daughter," she said. "Nashon, why don't you tell me why you let her in the kitchen unsupervised?" "I was busy serving the guests," I replied, feeling the resentment growing inside. "Just like you asked." "Oh, of course," her voice oozed sarcasm. "You were so busy, especially when you were chatting up that professor, telling him about your great accomplishments." "He talked to me," I objected. "I was just answering his question." "Yes, of course," Prudence rolled her eyes. "You'll always find an excuse. You always do. And in the end, I'm the one who has to fix everything." She turned to leave, but I stopped her. "Prudence, that's enough. I've been working all day getting this party ready. I'm tired, and I won't have you talking to me like a servant." She turned around, and her eyes flashed with such fury that I stepped back. "Will you let me?" Her voice was quiet but full of venom. "And what are you here if not a servant? You live in our house, eat our food, spend our money, and all we ask in return is a little help. And you can't even manage that." Her words hit me like a physical force. I stared at her in silence, not recognizing this woman as my daughter, the girl Elizabeth and I had raised with love and care. "Prudence, what's going on?" Bertram entered the kitchen, his face a look of concern. "Aurora broke your mother's dish," Prudence replied, "and Papa, instead of looking after her, was chatting with the guests." "I see," Bertram looked at me with undisguised disappointment. "Carlton, we had a deal." "What was our agreement, Bertram?" I interrupted, feeling the years of humiliation and resentment building up. "That I would be invisible in my own family, a slave who does your errands and keeps silent?" "Papa," Prudence exclaimed, "this is completely inappropriate right now. We have guests." "Yes, we have guests," I nodded, "who I've been serving all evening, despite the pain in my back and the fatigue. And that's after 2 weeks of preparation for this feast. I did everything you asked, everything." Prudence and Bertram exchanged glances, and I saw in their eyes what I'd seen so many times before, a mixture of annoyance and pity, as if I were a cranky child throwing a tantrum. "Let's talk about this tomorrow," Bertram suggested in a conciliatory tone. "Now is not the time." "Sure," I grinned bitterly. "There is never a good time for me. For my feelings, for my opinion, for my dignity." So, Dad, stop being so dramatic." Prudence waved her hand irritably. "Go see if the guests need anything." And then something inside me snapped, or rather straightened out completely. I straightened to my full height, feeling the years of humiliation roll off me like old skin. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "What?" Prudence blinked, disbelieving her ears. "I said no. I will no longer be your servant." "For God's sake, Papa," she rolled her eyes. "Not now. Go and do what I'm asking you to do." "I said no." My voice was louder than I expected. There was silence in the kitchen, and I heard the conversations in the next room fall silent. Great, now the guests could hear us arguing. "Quiet," Bertram hissed. "They can hear us." "Let them hear us." I didn't intend to lower my voice. "Let them know how you treat me." "Daddy," Prudence's voice was ringing with steel. "Get to work, now." I didn't move. I'm not your employee. I'm your father. Prudence grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door to the living room. If you're my father, then act like it. Her voice shook with rage. Don't embarrass me in front of my guests. She practically pushed me out into the living room, where all the guests were now looking in our direction. The music was still playing, but the talking had stopped. It's okay, Prudence said with a strained smile, turning to the guests. Just a little misunderstanding. She walked over to the music center and turned off the music. Bertram was standing next to me, his face tense and his hand gripping my shoulder with a strength I hadn't expected. Haha, I apologize for the slight interruption, Prudence addressed the guests. My father is a little tired and upset. He hasn't been at his best lately. The guests looked at us with awkward smiles, not knowing how to react. I saw Professor Simmons among them, his face a look of genuine concern. I'm perfectly all right, I said loudly, and quite sane if that's what you mean, Prudence. Daddy, please, her smile became even more strained. Why don't you go and get some rest? You're obviously overworked. I'm not overworked. I just don't want to be invisible in my own family anymore. There was a heavy silence in the room. The guests looked at each other, clearly feeling uncomfortable. Bertram tried to smile, but it didn't come out well. Perhaps we should continue this conversation later, he suggested, turning to me. Oh, no, Bertram, I shook my head. 2 years later is long enough. Prudence came toward me, her face flaming with anger and shame. A burden like you is good for nothing, she hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. Go to your room at once. Those words spoken by my daughter, my only child, the one Elizabeth and I had raised with such love, hit me right in the heart. But instead of pain, I felt a strange release, as if the last shackles had fallen from me. A burden? I repeated quietly. Is that what I have become to you, Prudence? A burden? Daddy, not now. She tugged at my arm, trying to pull me away. I think now is the time, I said, breaking free of her grip. It's time for everyone to know the truth. I turned to the guests who were frozen in awkward silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, surprised at the calmness of my voice. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Carlton Hicks, Prudence's father and former professor of history. 2 years ago, after my wife died, I sold our house and moved in here with my daughter and son-in-law. They convinced me that it was dangerous to live alone at my age, that I would be better off here, that I would be part of the family. I paused. Prudence stood beside me, her face pale. Sovereign, Daddy, please, she whispered. Don't. But instead of a family, I continued, ignoring her plea, I've been given the role of a servant. I cook, I clean, I pick up the kids from school, I mow the lawn. I do everything I'm told and keep quiet when I'm humiliated. And when I try to speak my mind, I'm called a burden. I took a picture of Elizabeth out of my pocket and showed it to the guests. This is my wife, Elizabeth. We've been married for 46 years. When I moved here, Prudence insisted I get rid of most of our belongings, including Elizabeth's jewelry, the necklace I'd given her for our 20th wedding anniversary, the earrings she'd inherited from her mother, the sapphire engagement ring. Prudence took a step forward, her eyes widening. Papa, stop. Yarafwan, she said she was going to send them off to be appraised and then put them in a safe deposit box. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. But instead, she sold them and embezzled the money. Just like she embezzled the money from the sale of my house. The room erupted in shocked gasps. That's not true, Prudence exclaimed. Papa is confused. I found the receipt, I interrupted her, in your desk when I was looking for the forms for the tax return. Golden Lion Pawn Shop, $8,000, for jewelry that was worth 10 times that. Bertram stepped forward, his face contorted. Carlton, don't you understand? Oh, I understand perfectly well, Bertram. I looked him straight in the eye. I realize that you and Prudence were planning to send me to a nursing home after this holiday. I heard you two talking yesterday, and you were going to pay for it with the money from the sale of my house. My house that I've been paying off for 30 years. The guests began to look around and whisper. Prudence looked like she'd been hit. Daddy, you don't understand, her voice shook. We wanted what was best for you. In a nursing home, you would have been taken care of by professionals. Don't lie, I shook my head. You wanted to get rid of a burden, a man who's keeping you from living the life you want to live. From a father who isn't good enough for your ambitions. I turned to the guests. For 2 years, I endured humiliation. 2 years, I let them treat me like furniture. But today is the end. I will no longer be anyone's burden, and I will no longer let anyone else decide my life for me. There was dead silence in the room. No one knew what to say or do. Bertram stood with a look of shock on his face, and Prudence looked as if she might faint at any moment. Suddenly, from somewhere in the crowd of guests came Professor Simmons. He came up to me and put his hand on my shoulder. "Professor Hicks," he said quietly, "if you need a place to stay, my house is open to you." I felt tears come to my eyes, but I held them back. "Thank you, Edward," I said. "I appreciate it." "So, no one's going anywhere," Prudence exclaimed, her voice breaking. "Daddy, you can't just leave. This is your home." "No, Prudence," I shook my head. "It's not my home. It was never my home, as it turns out. And I'm leaving." There was a dead silence in the living room after I said that. The guests froze like statues, with glasses in their hands and expressions of shock frozen on their faces. I saw some of them exchanging glances, silently asking each other the same question. What are we going to do now? The first to come to her senses was the bank chairman's wife, a tall woman with perfectly styled silver hair. "I think we should go," she said, turning to her husband and setting the unfinished glass on the nearest table. "Bertram, Prudence, thank you for the evening." Her voice was emphatically neutral, but her eyes showed judgment. Bertram jerked as if from a blow and tried to save the situation. "Margaret, Richard, please don't go. It's just a misunderstanding. My father-in-law is not quite well, and—" "There's nothing wrong with me," I interrupted him firmly. "My only ailment is 2 years of humiliation." Prudence, pale as a sheet, grabbed my arm and tried to pull me aside. "Daddy, you're ruining everything," she hissed. "Do you realize what you're doing?" I broke free of her grip. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm restoring my dignity." One by one, the guests began to bow out. Awkward smiles, crumpled wishes, hasty handshakes. The party turned into a stampede. Bertram darted from one guest to another, trying to hold them back, but to no avail. His face grew redder and his movements more and more abrupt. I stood back, watching this outcome with a strange calmness. There was no gloating or satisfaction inside me, just fatigue and a strange, almost physical sense of release, as if I had dropped a heavy knapsack after a long journey. Edward Simmons came up to me as the last of the guests were heading for the exit. "Nah, Carlton," he said quietly. "My offer stands. If you need a place to stay, at least for a while." I looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern in them. Not the pity I hated so much, but simple human concern. "Thank you, Edward. Yeah, I need to pack." He nodded understandingly. "I live across the street, third house on the left. Brown with white shutters. Come when you're ready." "Anytime." I nodded gratefully, and he shook my hand, firmly, like an equal. That simple gesture meant more to me than he'd realized. When the door closed behind the last guest, the house was dead silent for a moment, and then the storm broke. "You—" Bertram turned to me, his face contorted with rage. "Do you realize what you've just done? You destroyed everything." Prudence picked up on it, her voice breaking into a shriek. "Richard Caldwell was going to offer Bertram the position of regional director. That's not going to happen now." I looked at them, my daughter and son-in-law, red with anger, their faces contorted, and felt nothing but fatigue and old lingering pain. "I'm sorry," I said, and it was true. I was sorry not for the ruined holiday or Bertram's career prospects, but for what my daughter had become, for what I had failed to prevent. "Are you sorry?" Prudence let out a short, wicked laugh. "Oh, now you are sorry, after you made us look like liars and thieves in front of all our friends and coworkers." "But isn't that the truth?" I asked quietly. She recoiled as if I had hit her. "Shunning, how dare you," she hissed. "After all we've done for you, we've given you a roof over your head, fed you, taken care of you." "You used me as free labor," I interrupted her. "You took my money, sold your mother's jewelry, and didn't even ask my opinion. You planned to send me to a nursing home without bothering to discuss it with me. Because you would have made a scene." Summer and Prudence exploded. "Like you did today." "So it's true then?" came a quiet voice from the doorway. We all turned around. There stood Hamish in his pajamas, his eyes wide open. Next to him, half hidden behind his back, stood Aurora, her face shiny with tears. "Children, go to your rooms," Prudence said sharply. "This is none of your business." "Do you really want to send Grandpa to a home for old people?" Hamish asked without moving from his seat. "And you sold grandmother's things?" "Hamish, it's complicated," Bertram interjected, his voice suddenly softer. "Grown-up stuff. Go to bed, we'll talk in the morning." "You cheated, Grandpa," Hamish said with the directness that only children are capable of. "It's not fair." "Hamish!" Prudence took a step toward him, but he backed away. "I don't want Grandfather to go." His voice trembled. "He's not going anywhere," Prudence replied with a strained smile. "Ah, we'll work it out. Now go to bed." Hamish looked at me, his eyes asking for confirmation. I couldn't lie to him. "I have to go, Hamish," I said softly. "But that doesn't mean I won't see you and Aurora." "Daddy!" Prudence exclaimed. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare what?" I turned to her. "Tell the truth?" "I won't lie anymore, Prudence. Not to myself, not to my children, not to anyone." I walked over to my grandchildren and knelt down, wincing at the pain in my joints. "I love you both," I said, looking into their eyes. "I always will. But sometimes adults have to make hard decisions. I have to leave to live my life." "But will you come back?" Aurora asked in a trembling voice. "I will see you," I promised, "as soon as everything is settled." Hamish suddenly stepped forward and hugged me tightly. Aurora followed suit. I hugged them both, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling their little hearts beating next to mine. "Now go to sleep," I whispered to them. "Everything will be okay." They reluctantly backed away and, casting last glances over my shoulder, walked up the stairs. I straightened up slowly, feeling my knees crunch. "You can't just leave," Prudence said as the children disappeared from sight. "Where will you go? What are you going to live on?" "I'll figure it out," I replied. "I have a pension, and I'm not as helpless as you think I am." "That's ridiculous," Bertram snorted. "You wouldn't last a week." "Maybe," I shrugged, "but it would be my week. My life, my decisions, my mistakes. If you leave now," Prudence's eyes narrowed, "don't think you can come back when things get hard." "I won't come back," I said quietly. "Never." The words hung between us, heavy as stones. Prudence turned away, her shoulders tense. "Do whatever you want," she said, "as always." I didn't respond to this injustice. Instead, I went to my room to pack my things. There was surprisingly little: clothes, a few books, photos. My whole life fit into one shabby suitcase that I had brought with me 2 years ago. As I packed, I discovered how little of this room was really mine, as if I were not a member of the family, but a temporary guest whose presence was barely noticeable. I folded my clothes and carefully arranged the pictures of Elizabeth and our young family, wrapping them in a sweater so as not to damage them. After some thought, I added a few gifts from Hamish and Aurora, a drawing for Grandparents' Day, a homemade ashtray made of clay, though I'd never smoked, a card that read, "To the best grandfather in the world," in uneven, childish handwriting. Somewhere in the middle of packing, I noticed that my hands were shaking and tears were coming to my eyes. I sat on the edge of my bed and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Despite everything that had happened, it was hard to leave. Not because of Prudence and Bertram, but because of the kids, because of the irrational fear that I might not see them again, that Prudence would do anything to keep me away from them. I pulled a picture of Elizabeth out of my pocket, the one I'd been showing my guests. "What would you do if you were me, Liz?" I whispered. Of course, she didn't answer, but looking into her smiling eyes, I knew the answer. She would have done the same thing, probably much sooner and with much more noise. Elizabeth never tolerated injustice, especially to those she loved. Finishing packing, I took one last look around the room. It was strange to realize that I'd spent 2 years here, but I'd left no trace of myself. It was as if I'd never been here. I suppressed the urge to write a note to the children. Prudence would probably intercept it. Instead, I mentally promised myself to find a way to contact them when things settled down. The house was quiet when I left the room with my suitcase. The lights in the living room were off, with only a thin strip of light coming from under the door of Bertram's study. I could hear muffled voices. They were still discussing what had happened, trying to assess the damage to their reputations and Bertram's career. I could have left discreetly, but that seemed cowardly. Instead, I knocked on the office door. "Come in." Bertram's voice sounded tired. I opened the door. They were sitting at the desk, Bertram in a chair, Prudence on the edge of the table. There was an almost empty bottle of whiskey in front of them. "I'm leaving," I said simply. Prudence looked at me with a long stare. For a moment I thought there was a shadow of regret in her eyes, but it might have been a play of light. "Where are you going?" she asked at last. "To Edward Simmons," for the first time. "That professor?" Bertram snorted. "He barely knows you. He's shown me more respect in one evening than you have in 2 years," I replied calmly. Prudence turned away, her profile looking stiff, almost alien in the semi-darkness. "So, will you get your stuff out of the garage?" she asked in a businesslike tone. "I'll send for them when I'm settled." "Keys." Bertram held out his hand. "To the house." I silently took the 2 keys out of my pocket and put them on the table. The gesture seemed to put an end to our conversation. "Goodbye," I said, and headed for the exit. "Daddy," Prudence called out to me when I was already in the doorway. I turned around. "You've always been selfish, always thinking only of yourself. Even now." I looked at her for a long time. My daughter, the one I'd once held in my arms. The one I'd read bedtime stories to. The one I'd taught to ride a bike. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Prudence," I said quietly. "But most of all, I regret that I failed to teach you compassion and respect." With those words, I closed the door behind me. Stepping outside, I felt the cool night air wash over my face. It was almost midnight, but some of the windows in the neighboring houses were still glowing. I stood on the porch, feeling a strange lightness and a heaviness in my heart at the same time. The end and the beginning intertwined in one moment. The suitcase was heavier than I expected. I walked slowly down the steps, trying not to strain my aching back. For a moment I wondered, was I doing the right thing, leaving at night at my age with aching joints? Maybe Bertram was right and I wouldn't last a week. But then I remembered the look on Prudence's face when she called me a burden, and my doubts dissipated. Better to die free and with dignity than to live in humiliation, even if it meant comfort and security. I walked slowly down the quiet street, lit only by the occasional street lamp and the light of the moon. The suitcase was pulling my arm away, and after a few dozen meters, I had to stop and catch my breath. Years and illness were taking their toll on me, and every step was difficult. Edward's house was exactly as he described, brown with white shutters. The yard was lined with well-tended rose bushes, and a welcoming porch light burned on the porch, as if waiting for me. I made it the last few meters and, gathering my strength, walked up to the porch. Before I could knock, the door opened. Edward was standing on the doorstep in a homemade sweater, his gray hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd dozed off in the chair waiting for me. "Carlton," he said with a warm smile, "I've been expecting you." I wanted to answer, but suddenly found myself unable to utter a word. The lump in my throat and the fatigue that had built up over the years had finally taken over. I just stood there with my suitcase in my hand, unable to move or speak. Edward seemed to understand without words. He simply took my suitcase and gestured for me to come in. "Welcome, my friend," he said quietly. "You're safe." I stepped over the threshold and the door closed behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt accepted for who I was, not as a burden, not as a servant, not as a dilapidated relic of the past, but as a human being, just a man. The first few days at Edward's house were a blur. I slept in the small but cozy guest room, ate the food he offered, and mostly stayed silent, digesting what had happened. Edward didn't rush me with conversations or plans, giving me space to recover. He'd lived alone since his wife's death 5 years ago, and he seemed to appreciate the company. "I don't have children," he once said over morning coffee, "so the house is too big for one person. Your presence is a gift to me." I smiled gratefully, but worry gnawed at me inside. I couldn't stay here for long, despite my host's hospitality. I needed to regain my independence, to find my way. On the third day, I decided to take the unpleasant but necessary step of calling the bank to find out what was left of my savings. A conversation with the manager brought unexpected news. In addition to the pension, there was about $15,000 left on my account. It was only a fraction of the amount from the sale of the house, but I believe Prudence had taken it all. Prudence Tate had access to your account, the manager explained, but you remain the primary holder. She couldn't close the account without your signature. Apparently, Prudence didn't have time to transfer that last money, or she left it as a kind of insurance. Either way, it gave me a little financial cushion to start a new life. When I told Edward about it, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. 15,000 isn't a small start, he said. With your pension, you could rent a small apartment. There are a couple of low-cost senior citizen complexes on the east side of town. I want to live on my own, I shook my head. Not in a nursing home or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about, Edward smiled. I'm talking about regular apartments, just in houses that are mostly people our age. It's quieter, safer, and the neighbors understand the specific problems. The next day we went to look at options. Edward lent me his car. I hadn't driven in 2 years, but my skills returned quickly. We drove around 3 complexes before we found the right one, a small 2-story building with a dozen apartments surrounded by a well-kept garden. Mostly pensioners live here, explained the real estate agent, a thin woman with bright lipstick. It's quiet. You can walk to the stores. There's a communal laundry room and a small courtyard for barbecues. The first-floor apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, a kitchen combined with a living room, and a tiny bathroom, but clean and bright. The window overlooked a flower bed, and the walls were painted a soft cream color. Something about the simplicity of it touched me. How much? I asked bluntly. $650 a month, including utilities, the agent replied. 2 months of security deposit. I made a quick calculation in my mind. With my pension of $1,200, I could afford this apartment and still have enough left over for food and medicine. Not luxury, but enough for a modest, decent life. I'll take it, I said, feeling my heart start to beat faster with the decision I had made. A week later, I moved in. Edward helped me buy the furniture I needed at the thrift store. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, and an armchair. We found an inexpensive floor lamp that reminded me of the one in Elizabeth's in my first apartment. My things from Prudence's house never showed up. Apparently, she'd decided to leave that last connection severed. The first night in the new apartment, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the unfamiliar bed, listening to the ticking of the cheap clock I'd bought at the supermarket, and thought about how my life had changed in 2 weeks. From being a disempowered burden in my daughter's house to being completely independent in my own apartment. It was scary, but at the same time, I felt a surge of energy that I hadn't felt in years. "See, Liz," I whispered into the darkness, looking at the picture of my wife on the bedside table. I did it after all. I'm free. In the morning, I was awakened by a knock on the door. I struggled to get up, wincing at the pain in my back. The new mattress was too hard for my old bones, and went to open it. On the doorstep stood a woman about my age, with short-cropped gray hair and lively brown eyes. In her hands, she held a basket covered with a plaid napkin. "Good morning," she said with a slight accent I couldn't identify. "I'm Corin Holder, your neighbor on the right. I thought I'd welcome a new tenant. These are blueberry muffins I made this morning." She handed me the basket, and the aroma of freshly baked goods filled the air. I felt my mouth fill with saliva. I hadn't eaten homemade muffins since Elizabeth was gone. "Carlton Hicks," I introduced myself, accepting the gift. "It's a pleasure to meet you. And thank you for the cupcakes. That's very nice of you." "It's nothing," she said. "I always bake too many. You know, it's a habit from when the kids lived at home. Do you have any coffee? If not, I can get some." Her directness and energy were so different from the tense atmosphere of Prudence's house that I smiled. "There's coffee, but I'm afraid there's no milk. I have it with me." She pulled a small carton of cream from the pocket of her cardigan. "I'm thoughtful." And so began my acquaintance with Corinne. Over coffee and muffins, she told me she'd been living here for 3 years, after she sold the big house she and her husband lived in. Her husband had died 5 years ago, and the kids had moved to different states. "They wanted me to move in with them," she said, spreading butter on a muffin. "But I refused. I love them. But living with kids at my age, no, it's not for me. I value my independence too much." I nodded, feeling a thread of understanding stretching between us. "And you?" she asked. "How did you end up here?" I wasn't going to tell my story, But there was something in her direct, interested gaze that made me want to be honest. So I told it. About Elizabeth's death, about moving in with her daughter, about 2 years of humiliation, about breaking up at Bertram's birthday party. Corinne listened without interrupting, only occasionally nodding or frowning. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, twirling the cup in her hands. My daughter tried to control my life, too, she said at last. Not as brutally as your Prudence, but she thought she knew what was best for me. Wanted me to sell all my stuff and move in with her in Minnesota. In the basement of their house, you know? Mom, you'll be comfortable. There's a private bathroom. I refused and she's still resentful. I nodded understandingly. There was something wonderfully life-affirming about this woman, a strength of character that shone through the wrinkles and gray hair. You know what, Carlton, she said, finishing her coffee. I'm going to the farmer's market. Would you like some company? You've got a refrigerator to fill, and I know all the best stalls. And so began my new life. Corinne became my guide to the world of self-sufficiency. She showed me where to buy groceries cheaper, introduced me to the other residents of our building, similarly retired people looking for a quiet but dignified life. Every morning we met on a bench in the garden and drank coffee, discussing news, books, memories. Gradually I organized my apartment. I bought a second-hand bookcase and filled it with books from the library and second-hand stores. Hung some reproductions of paintings Elizabeth and I loved on the walls. Purchased a radio to listen to classical music in the evenings. Life was taking a new direction. I learned how to cook simple meals, wash my own clothes, plan a budget. Each new skill, each day lived on my own, gave me confidence. But there were also difficult moments. Sometimes at night, the pain in my back became unbearable, and I lay awake, wishing there was someone around to give me painkillers or just sit beside me. Sometimes I forgot to take my medicine or turn off the stove, and it was frightening, a reminder that my age was taking its toll. It was Corinne who helped in those moments. It was as if she could sense when I was having a hard time and would show up on my doorstep with soup or fresh bread. She didn't ask me if I needed help. She just stood by me, without intrusiveness, without pity, as an equal. My arthritis gets worse in the rain, she once said, massaging my curled fingers with warm olive oil. It hurts so bad it makes you want to howl. So I understand. Gradually, I began to expand my social circle. On the recommendation of Edward, who visited me regularly, I started attending a group for the elderly at the local library. We discussed books, shared stories, and sometimes took field trips to Galveston's historic sites. My specialty in history proved to be in demand. People listened with interest when I talked about the city's past. One day at the library, I came across an ad for volunteers to work with children. We needed people to read books at the children's department on Saturdays. I signed up, not really hoping to be taken. But the program coordinator, an energetic middle-aged woman, after hearing about my teaching experience, immediately agreed. Kids love stories told with passion, she said. And you, Professor, have it all. So Saturdays became my favorite days. I read fairy tales and adventure stories to groups of children from 5 to 10 years old, trying to put into every word the same passion with which I had once lectured to students. The kids would listen with their mouths open and then barrage me with questions. It brought me back to life, gave me a sense of urgency that was missing in Prudence's house. But not everything went smoothly. About a month after I moved in, I overheard two women talking in the library. Have you heard about Professor Hicks? One of them said. They say he's developing dementia. His daughter was telling my friend that he's become forgetful, aggressive, even made a scene at her husband's birthday party, accused them of stealing. My God, how awful, answered the second. Poor woman. What's it like for her to have a father like that? I froze behind the bookshelf, feeling the color of shame flood my face. So Prudence was spreading rumors about my dementia to explain her behavior and restore my reputation. It was to be expected, but it still hurt. That evening, I told Corinne about it. She listened, then stood up resolutely. Let's go, she said. Where to? To the Galveston Daily News. My nephew works there. It's time to tell your story, Professor. I wasn't sure it was a good idea, but Corinne insisted. People need to know the truth, she said, and Prudence should realize that she couldn't defame her father's reputation with impunity. The interview came out a week later. a short article on page 3 titled Retired Professor, A Story of Dignity and Independence. I talked about my academic career, my life with my daughter, how I had decided to start over at 73. Not a word of condemnation toward Prudence, just the facts. It didn't take long to get a reaction. Edward called me the same day. "Your daughter is furious," he said without preamble. "She came to see me demanding your address. I wouldn't give it to her, of course." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of guilt and satisfaction. I didn't want to hurt her, I just wanted to restore the truth. "You did the right thing," Edward assured me. "By the way, the article made an impression. I've had colleagues from the college come up to me, asking if you'd like to give some lectures to the students." Paid lectures. This news was a breath of fresh air. To be able to return to teaching, even for a short time, seemed like a miracle. That evening, Corinne and I sat on a bench in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky with the same scarlet and purple colors I'd seen from the window of Prudence's house. But now those colors seemed a symbol not of loss, but of a new beginning. "You know, Carlton," said Corinne, looking at the sunset, "when I was widowed, I thought my life was over. That at 70 it was too late to change, too late to start over. But I was wrong. It's not too late, it's just a different phase. And it could be just as interesting as the previous ones." I nodded, feeling her words echo inside me with a deep understanding. "You would have liked Elizabeth," I said, looking at the fading sun. "She never gave up either." Corinne smiled and suddenly took my hand. Her palm was warm and dry, with bumps of arthritis so similar to my own. "So anyway, tell me about her," she asked, and I began to tell about the curly-haired girl I'd met in a lecture on ancient history, the woman who had supported me through all the ups and downs of our life together, the mother who had raised our daughter with a love and patience that I myself often lacked. Speaking of the past, I felt for the first time in a long time that I had a future. And that future, despite age and illness, could be filled with meaning, dignity, and perhaps even happiness. It had been 3 months since I had started my new life. Summer was slowly giving way to fall, and Galveston was enveloped in the mild warmth typical of September in Texas. My apartment was slowly taking on character. Everything was finding its place. Every corner was being filled with meaning. It wasn't just a collection of rooms, but a real home, my own little world. That morning I woke up earlier than usual. The arthritis in my knees reminded me of the nagging pain that often occurred when the weather changed. I slowly got out of bed, did some stretches taught to me by Corinne, a former yoga teacher, and put the kettle on. My morning ritual was simple: tea and toast by the window, browsing the newspaper, then a walk to the nearest park if my knees allowed. After 2 years of submitting to other people's schedules, I relished the opportunity to manage my own time. No one told me when to get up, what to eat, what to do. There was a knock on the door as I was making tea. Corinne usually came in later, around 9, so I curiously went to open it. On the doorstep stood the letter carrier, a young man with a freckled face and a friendly smile. "Mr. Hicks?" he asked, checking the envelope in his hand. "A registered letter. I need your signature." I signed the form and took the envelope. There was no sender, only my name and address, written in childish handwriting with excessive care. Closing the door, I sat down at the table and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a quadruple folded piece of ruled paper torn from a school notebook and a small photograph. The picture was of me with Hamish and Aurora, a snapshot from last year's Christmas, when we'd all decorated the tree together. I remembered that day one of the few times at Prudence's house when I felt truly part of the family. Unfolding the sheet, I began to read, "Dear Grandpa, I hope you are doing well. Mom forbade us to communicate with you, but I decided to write anyway. My friend Lucas promised to send a letter. His mom works at the post office. Aurora and I miss you and your stories very much. Dad and Mom have been fighting all the time since you left. Mom says you're a bad person, but I know that's not true. I heard her yelling at Daddy about the money you and Grandma were saving. Daddy said it wasn't fair. The school bus takes us to school now. Mom says they don't have time to pick us up. She also hired a new housekeeper because she doesn't have time to clean. She's mean and won't let us eat cookies before dinner like you did. I found your address on an envelope in Dad's office. There were a lot of letters from the bank, and Daddy looked very upset when he read them. Grandpa, can I come and visit you? I can take the bus myself. I'm big now. Aurora wants to come too, but she's still little, and I'm afraid she'll blab to Mommy. Please write where you live now and if I can come. Love you, your grandson Hamish. I reread the letter several times, feeling tears come to my eyes. The thought of my children remembering and missing me warmed my heart. But the realization that Prudence had forbidden them to speak to me was painful. Was her anger and resentment so strong that she was willing to deprive her own children of their grandfather's company? The question of whether to allow Hamish to come was a difficult one. On the one hand, I wanted madly to see my grandson. On the other hand, I realized that it might further strain my relationship with my daughter, and it might also cause problems for Hamish himself if Prudence found out. I put the letter on the table and went to the window. The day promised to be sunny, and Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor downstairs, was hanging laundry in the yard. An ordinary, peaceful picture, and there was something comforting in its simplicity. What would Elizabeth do? Was a question I'd asked myself often in recent months, and I almost always knew the answer. She would do the right thing, even if it was hard. She never hid from problems or let fear determine her decisions. I picked up a piece of paper and a pen. Dear Hamish, I wrote, I was very happy to receive your letter, and stopped. How to explain to an 8-year-old boy the complexity of the situation? How do I tell him that although I want to see him more than anything else in the world, I can't encourage him to cheat on his mother? There was another knock at the door. This time it was Corinne, with a basket of fresh scones and 2 glasses of coffee from the cafe on the corner. Good morning, Professor, she said, entering uninvited, as she had done so often lately. I thought it was a day for spiced coffee and... She stopped talking, noticing the look on my face. What's wrong? I silently held out Hamish's letter to her. She read it, put it on the table, and looked at me thoughtfully. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. The boy wants to see me and I want to see him too. But Prudence. To hell with Prudence, Corinne said abruptly. I'm sorry, but your daughter has no right to cut the children off from their grandfather. She's their mother, I objected. She has the right to decide who they should socialize with. Parental rights aren't absolute, Corinne shook her head, especially when it comes to a relationship as important as the one with their grandfather. We talked about it for a long time over coffee and scones, considering the pros and cons. In the end, I decided I couldn't encourage Hamish to come sneaking around, but I couldn't leave his letter unanswered either. In my reply, I wrote that I loved him and Aurora very much, missing them every day. Explained that my mom and I have a complicated relationship right now, but it has nothing to do with them. I asked him to be a good brother to Aurora and a good son to his parents, even when it's hard, and added that if he wanted to see me, he should ask Mom openly. Sometimes adults make mistakes, I wrote, but deception rarely makes a situation better. I sealed the letter, stuffed the envelope, and decided to take it to the post office this afternoon, but fate decreed otherwise. About noon, as I was returning from a short walk, I saw a familiar figure on a bench in front of the house. Hamish, with a backpack on his shoulders, was sitting with his legs dangling, clearly waiting for someone. My heart jumped when he spotted me and rushed toward me. "Grandpa!" he shouted, throwing himself into my arms. "I found you!" I hugged him, feeling my hands trembling with excitement. "Hamish, my boy, how did you get here?" "By bus," he said proudly. I took money from my piggy bank and went. It wasn't difficult. I had memorized the address from the letter. I was shocked by his determination and ingenuity, but also alarmed. "Does your mom know where you are?" He lowered his eyes. "No, she thinks I'm at Lucas's robotics class, but it doesn't end until 3, so we have time." I knew I should contact Prudence immediately, let her know I had her son. But the thought of losing those precious hours with my grandson was unbearable. "Let's go to the apartment," I said at last. "We need to talk." In my small living room, Hamish looked around with undisguised curiosity. "This doesn't look like our house," he said. "Yes, it's modest," I agreed. "But I like it," he said sincerely. "It's cozy, and it smells like books, like a library." I smiled, touched by his words, and offered tea and cookies that Corinne had baked. While Hamish gorged himself with appetite, I gently explained to him why I couldn't support his secret visits. "But it's not fair," he exclaimed when I told him I had to call Prudence. "She forbade us even to speak of you." Sometimes adults make mistakes. I repeated the words of my letter. But we can't fix their mistakes with our own. He pouted, but then he suddenly perked up. What if I told my mom that I decided to come to you? That you didn't invite me? Then she wouldn't be angry with you. There was childish logic in his words, but I shook my head. The truth is always better, Hamish. Besides, your mom must be really worried. She only worries about what people will say, he muttered with sudden insight. After the night you left, she's always talking about reputation. We talked for almost an hour. Hamish talked about school, about his new science teacher, about the robot he and Lucas were building for the science fair. He spoke quickly, as if he wanted to cram as much information as possible into our limited time together. I finally made up my mind and dialed Prudence's number. She answered after the third ring. Prudence, it's Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The silence on the other end of the line was so long that I thought she'd hung up. What do you need? She finally asked coldly. I have Hamish, I said bluntly. He'd come on his own. I didn't know he was planning this. What? Her voice went up an octave. How did he? He's supposed to be in class. Oh my God, I called the police. He's fine, I assured her. He just wanted to see me. Sure. I'll come get him right away, she cut me off. Give me the address. I dictated the address, and she hung up without even saying goodbye. Looking at Hamish, who was huddled on the couch, I realized we didn't have much time left together. Is Mom mad? He asked quietly. She was worried, I answered, trying to be honest but not scare him. She was on her way. He nodded, then suddenly jumped up and rushed to his backpack. I completely forgot. I brought you a present. He pulled out something wrapped in colored paper and handed it to me. It's from me and Aurora. We made it in labor class. I unwrapped the paper and found a wooden picture frame. It was neatly glued and painted in bright colors, and on the back were the names, From Hamish and Aurora, with love. It's for you to put a picture of Grandma on, Hamish explained. You always said she was beautiful. I couldn't hold back the tears. This simple gift, made with such love by children's hands, meant more to me than any expensive thing. Thank you, I whispered, hugging my grandson tightly. This is the best gift ever. We were sitting hugging when the doorbell rang. Prudence arrived sooner than I expected. When I opened the door, I saw her, pale, with circles under her eyes, with an expression that was a mixture of anger and fear on her face. But there was something else in her gaze that I couldn't quite pinpoint. Hamish, she exclaimed when she saw her son. Can you imagine how worried I was? He lowered his head guiltily. I'm sorry, Mom. I just wanted to see Grandpa. Prudence looked from him to me, as if she didn't know who to be angrier at. Shush it on. Pack your things, she said finally, and we're going home. Hamish stood up slowly, walked over to his backpack, and began stuffing the textbooks he'd pulled out to show me his progress. Prudence and I stood in awkward silence. I could see her scrutinizing my apartment, noting the modest furnishings, the cleanliness, the books on the shelves. You've settled in well, she said at last, with a note of surprise in her voice. Yes, I replied simply. I like it here. Silence again. Hamish fiddled with his backpack longer than he should have, clearly delaying the moment of departure. Daddy, Prudence said suddenly, and it sounded strange, an address I hadn't heard since that fateful night. Yeah, Bertram had lost his job. It was so sudden that I didn't know what to say at once. I'm sorry, I said at last. After you left, after that night, many of his clients and partners turned their backs on him, she continued without looking me in the eye. The bank management expressed concern. First, he was transferred to a less prestigious position, and then... Anyway, he's looking for a job now. I nodded, not knowing what to say. Part of me felt pleased that Bertram had to face the consequences of his actions. But the other part, the part that would always be a father, sympathized with a daughter in a difficult position. We're in financial trouble, Prudence continued. We could lose the house if Bertram didn't get a job soon. I understood what she was getting at. I realized it, and I felt a wave of resentment rising inside me. Even now, after everything, she saw me as a source of money, as a solution to her problems. Summer, I'm sorry, Prudence, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. But I can't help you. I barely have enough to live on myself. She lifted her head, a look of resentment in her eyes. I didn't ask for money. You didn't? I raised an eyebrow. She looked away. I just thought you should know. I know now, I nodded, and I repeat, I'm sorry. Hamish, finally finished with his backpack, came over to me. Can I still come to see you, Grandpa? He asked hopefully, looking at me and his mother. Prudence sighed. We'll talk about it at home, she said, but her voice was not as emphatic as before. I knelt down so I was level with my grandson. It's always good to see you, Hamish, but next time let's make arrangements ahead of time, okay? And with Mom's permission. He nodded and hugged me tightly. I breathed in the scent of his hair, memorizing the sensation. Say hi to Aurora, I whispered to him. It's time, Hamish, Prudence said, taking his hand. She turned around at the door. Daddy, she started but stopped, as if she didn't know what to say next. Yes? I nudged her. Nothing, she shook her head. Just take care of yourself. With those words, they left. I stood at the window for a long time, watching them walk to the car, Prudence helping Hamish buckle up, and them drive away. Something in the expression on her daughter's face, a fleeting softness, a glimpse of the Prudence I used to know, gave me a faint hope that in time our relationship might improve. Not now, perhaps not even in the next few years, but someday. After they left, I put Elizabeth's picture in a new frame donated by my grandchildren and placed it in the most prominent spot in the living room. Then I sat in a chair and stared at it for a long time, remembering our marriage, our life, our dreams. You'd be proud of him, Liz, I said aloud. He's such a brave boy. There was a knock at the door, and I knew it was Corinne. She always showed up, as if sensing when I needed company. Come in, I called out. She came in with a small pot of geraniums. I thought you might want something lively in the apartment, she said, setting the flower on the windowsill. Oh, what a beautiful frame. I told her about Hamish's visit and my conversation with Prudence. She listened attentively, nodding in the right places. You know, Carlton, she said when I was done, I think your daughter is beginning to realize what she's lost. Maybe I didn't want to get my hopes up, Senor, but I won't live by her rules anymore. Not ever again. And rightly so, Corinne nodded decisively. At our age, we've earned the right to live as we see fit. I looked at my small apartment, at the modest furniture, at the pictures, at the books, everything that made up my new world. A world where I was free to make decisions, to make mistakes, to be myself. A world built on self-respect. Yes, it didn't have the luxuries of Prudence's house. There was no expensive furniture, no big rooms, no fancy appliances. But there was freedom. Here was respect, for myself and from others. Here I could look in the mirror every morning and see not a helpless old man, but a man who had lived a long, meaningful life and continued to live it on his own terms. I thought of Hamish, of his bravery and loyalty, about Prudence, who was perhaps beginning to realize the price of her actions, about Corinne, who had come into my life and brought light and warmth to it. In that moment, sitting in my chair in my modest apartment overlooking the flower bed, I realized that I had found what I had missed in my daughter's house, not just a roof over my head, but a real home, a place where I could be myself, where my opinion mattered, where my life was all mine. And that sense of freedom and dignity was worth all the hardship, all the pain, all the doubt, worth every minute of it.